Hello and welcome back to Round of the Table, number 48, coming to you from the meeting point here in Bilbao, broadcasting not only to Bilbao but around the world. This week we've been having some lively discussions about International Women's Day and the roles of different genders in society. We were discussing why we have an International Women's Day and if there is any time in the foreseeable future when it will not be necessary. And unfortunately, even though we are making progress and we are fortunate to live in a society where there is a fairly high level of equality and women do have a great deal of rights, there is still a lot of progress yet to be made. And the general consensus of opinion is that in 50 years' time, we will probably still have an International Women's Day in which people protest for their rights. So we do not see true equality on the horizon or in the near future. But sometime these things may happen. Unfortunately, there is still a great deal of discrimination in the world. We also discussed a lot of stereotypes, stereotypical behaviour, and why we assume that certain roles in life will be filled by either males or females. Stereotypical behaviour and imagery. Here we see a poster. I took this photo when I went to visit the doctor only 6 months ago. Maybe you thought it was from the 1960s or 1970s, but no, it's a modern day poster. So these stereotypical images are still to be found all around us, which is a little bit sad to say the least. So shall we look at some of the typical mistakes for this week? The word news is still causing considerable problems. So here are some sentences. Maybe we should just learn these sentences. The news is good. The news is bad. The news is. Okay, it has an S on the end. It still takes a singular verb. Okay, the news is. I have some news for you. If someone says I have some news for you, it's not a plural. It might only be one piece of information. But this is the phrase, I have some news for you. Or, have you heard the news? Again, it's always got the S on the end, but it's not really a plural. You can say I read a news item, a news story, I read an article about something. Those are the phrases if you really want to make it singular. And don't forget, things are in the news. Sometimes we talk about on the news. When we say on the news, what we're really referring to is on the news television programme, because it's on television. But normally things are in the news if people are talking about them. Okay, so the word news is still causing problems. Okay, another problem I saw this week. This phrase here, somebody said, women don't pay and men, yes. Okay, don't just finish with yes. You need to take the auxiliary from the previous part of the sentence. So women don't pay, men do. Okay. Fred can't swim, but John can. I would like to go to China, but my friend wouldn't. Okay, it needs to correspond. Use those auxiliaries, don't forget. Another one that I've seen this week is using breakfast, lunch, dinner as verbs. Don't use them as verbs. People don't really lunch anymore. Maybe if you read something from the 1920s, which is 100 years ago. Maybe back in those days they used to lunch and breakfast, but now we don't. We use the verb have or eat. Probably have. Have has so many uses. Just say, I have lunch, I have dinner, I have breakfast, etc. The word prefer. Right, prefer is followed by a to infinitive. I prefer to do this. Okay, I prefer to do. The negative is I prefer not to. If I prefer to walk to work, or I prefer not to walk to work. Now you can use prefer to make comparisons. So I prefer one thing to another. If you're using nouns, you can compare two nouns. I prefer Chinese food to Indian food, for example. Well, that's not true. It's the other way around. But I prefer this to this. Prefer to, okay, when you're making comparisons. It's not than, okay? You can use than if you like something more than something else, or something is better than, okay? So normally you're using than to make comparisons, but not with prefer. I prefer one thing to the other thing. Now that's your typical mistakes for this week. Let's have a look at this pronunciation problem. Now this pronunciation problem is actually from the week before, but I didn't have time to tell you last week. So we're going to look at some words with silent letters. Today, the silent letter L. In words like walk and talk, you can't hear the letter L. Walk, talk, rhyme with pork. Walk and talk. Now there might be some places in England where they do pronounce the L. If you go up to the northeast, you might hear walk and talk. But for the majority of people, it's walk, talk with a silent L. Folk and yoke rhyme with coke. And again, there are quite a lot of people that will pronounce the L, but the most common pronunciation, the standard English pronunciation, is with a silent L. So this word folk, some people might say folk with an L, but most people say folk, rhymes with coke. And yolk, the middle of an egg, is a yolk, the yellow bit. Palm, calm, tend to rhyme with farm. I like to do a little bit of an L in the middle there. I do say palm and calm, but most people just say palm, calm, rhyming with farm. Half and calf also have silent L's. A calf is a young cow, if you don't know. So half and calf rhyme with laugh, but make sure you know how to pronounce laugh. Obviously, would, could and should all have silent L's, so that would is exactly the same as wood that comes from trees. Would, could, should. And salmon, the fish salmon, also has a silent L. So that is the end of the pronunciation problems for this week. Now it's time for an interesting word. Today's interesting word is grain. Now, a lot of people hear the word grain and you think of cereals. You can have a grain of wheat, grain of corn. Okay, so a small piece of wheat is a grain. So all of those cereal crops can have grains, but also minerals. You also have a grain of sand and a grain of salt. A very small piece is a grain. A metaphorical one that you might hear is a grain of truth, a very small piece of truth. Especially in a negative sentence, there's not a grain of truth in what he said. Means there is absolutely nothing true. There is not a grain of truth in what he said. You also have grain in wood. If you look at a piece of wood, you can see the lines in the wood. That pattern that you see on a piece of wood, on a table, for example, is called the grain. If you work with wood and you want to cut it, it's a lot easier to cut wood in the same direction as the grain. To cut across the grain is more complicated, especially if you want a very neat, smooth surface. So again, metaphorically, we have to go against the grain is to do something that is contrary to what all other people do or what all other people believe. So a person that goes against the grain behaves in a very different way to other people. And from this, we can get the word ingrained. Imagine if you had a table and you dropped some paint or ink on the table. You might be able to wipe it off with a cloth, but there would still be lines left in the wood. In the grain of the wood, it would be very difficult to get all of the paint out of the surface. Yeah? In the same way as if you were fixing a car and you got your hands very black, you might go and wash your hands, but there would still be black lines in those little cracks in your hands. Yeah? So that dirt is ingrained. Okay? The dirt is ingrained in your hands or in the wood. Then, metaphorically, you can talk about behaviour being ingrained in the culture. This is why it came up this week. Stereotypical behaviour, what is expected of men and women in society, that is because it is ingrained in the culture. And that is why grain is a very interesting word. And let's have a little what's the difference then. A few what's the difference words came up this week. Uncover, discover. If you take the cover off of something, you uncover it. You don't discover it. You discover something that you did not know was there. Okay? You can discover a scientific principle or discover a new element. Or you can even discover a country. Although the people that already live there will have other things to say about that. But discover is to find something that you did not know existed. Whereas if you only remove the cover from something, you are uncovering it. Uncover can sometimes be used in police operations. They can uncover a criminal gang or something like that. So sometimes you get uncover when you're talking police. And if we're talking about policemen, they often do investigations. A criminal investigation is trying to find who is responsible. Scientists do research, or people who want statistics, they do research, asking people's opinions, etc. Okay, scientists do not do investigation, really. It's called research normally. Policemen do investigations. There is also inquiry is also used, which is not really the same as investigation. Investigation tends to be looking for a criminal to find out who is responsible. Inquiries are more to do with accidents to find out why they happened. If there's a big fire in a building, for example, or a big accident in a football stadium where lots of people die, it's called an inquiry. So it's to find the cause of an accident, usually. And when talking about marches, protesting and going on a protest march, sometimes it's called a protest, sometimes it's called a march, sometimes it's called a protest march. You can also use the word demonstration, or demo for short. But it's not a concentration. Concentration is what you need when you're studying. It's not a group of people. And also is not referred to as a manifestation. A manifestation in English is how something shows itself. So if there is lots of lights in the sky, it might be a manifestation of increased solar activity. So it's the way something is shown is a manifestation. It's not a protest march. And finally, we have this. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Is the question. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. Now this is a phrasal verb joke based on the fact that make up has two meanings. So They make up everything means everything is composed of atoms, okay? But make up is also to invent, as people invent stories. So this is why you don't trust an atom, because they make up everything. So you can't believe their stories. That is a phrasal verb joke. I have several more, but I'll save them for another day. And of course, if you want more jokes, you'll have to be in the meeting point next week, because we'll be discussing humour. All types of humour, what we find funny and why we find it funny. Is there such a thing as dated humour that used to be funny that's not funny now? All kinds of interesting conversations down at the meeting point. So if I don't see you through the week, have a good week. Till next week.